Hello, welcome back to the Rolling Darkness Revue channel. Prost. Right, so today I'm going to be reading to you from the 2012 Rolling Darkness Revue tour and chapbook. That tour was called The Raven of October. My story in that was called His Only Audience, and it was one of the first adventures with two characters called the Collector, or Normal, and Nadine, his longtime partner in all things. And I'm just in the process of wrapping up a book about them, a book in stories called Infinity Dreams, a novel in stories. And this story is actually part of that, a new version of it. This is called His Only Audience, and here is a performance version, slightly abridged, of the original His Only Audience. Is that confusing enough for you? Here goes. Around and beneath them, the houseboat thumped and shuddered, and as usual on these visits, Nadine wished the collector and his client would just turn off the shortwave and sit a while. Maybe instead of hunching forever at the wooden table in this windowless hold, they could try the deck in the starlight and let the world bring its wonders to them for once. All those things down there in the bay, living or just floating, knocking against hulls, murmuring hello. Got one, Spook said, straightening as though called to attention. Out of the hissing static, the snippets of Iranian classical music and BBC Wherever broadcasts, the dot dash chirruping from ships so out of time that they still used Morse code, a voice flared, flickered out, caught as Spook locked in on the signal. Ice voice. The voice Ice would speak in. Female, if Ice had gender. 7, 3, 6, 8, 5, null. Crackle. Empty frequency. Then again. 7, 3, 6. And by the third repetition, as always, Nadine was leaning forward too, forgetting the bay, lowering her ear toward the receiver with its console knob and compass face, its warped and blistered casing. New one? She said. I think so. Grabbing his notebook off the shelf behind him, Spook scrolled through his pages and pages of charts, lists of every number station he'd located in decades of scouring the shortwave bands. Usually he could tell just by the voice if he'd heard the signal before, though Nadine wasn't sure how, given that so many of them used identical inflectionless tones. She'd wondered if there'd been a voiceover school for number stations right after World War II, when they were apparently in actual use, and not just left, forgotten, to bleat their coded messages for absolutely no one. Had there been a Bletchley Park for blankness, where you learned to drain yourself entirely out of your own speech? When he'd reached the end of his list, Spook nodded. Brand new. He noted down the number string. But not your dad's, Nadine asked. A shadow swept over Spook's sun-mottled, friendly face, the way it did every time anyone asked about his father. No, he said, and closed his notebook. Only then did he seem to notice his own posture, the ramrod attention the chanting ice voice had drawn from him. He shook his head, and the shadow fell away. And there I was, wondering why they call me Spook. You never were one, were you? Said the collector, though his attention remained fixed on the radio. Cataloging, Nadine knew. Storing away information, though God knew into what subfolder and which drawer in the bottomless pit of a file cabinet that passed for his head. Spook drew a calloused hand through his white-gray hair. I'm a houseboat handyman, all I've ever wanted to be. Son of Spook, Nadine said. This time Spook laughed. Son of Spook. Hey, sorry, what are we drinking tonight? Something Belgian, blurted the collector, as though beating a televised Jeopardy contestant to an answer. Nadine rolled her eyes. Now let's try something more specific for $200. But she grinned. These evenings, after all, were rare in their lives. Spook did technically qualify as a client, but unlike everyone else who employed the collector, he didn't want to beat anybody to a rediscovery or hoard something esoteric. He simply wanted to log number stations, and someday pinpoint the one that had beamed orders to his father the spy throughout the Cold War, and then brought him home. Home, but blank. Even more than that, though, Spook wanted company, and he served Belgian beer and sometimes warm camembert. In terms of her life with the collector, that almost qualified these evenings as social occasions. Couples club. I say it's a Rodenbach night, Spook said, and smiled at Nadine, the collector, his radio, which, okay, would have to do as Spook's contribution to the couples part of the proceedings, but still, and got up. Can I hunt for a new one while you're gone? Said the collector, gesturing at the radio. Sure, like this. Spook put his hand on the knob and pushed it in and twirled it. Spats of static filled the air. Boat chirp, guitar strum, the BBC again. Arabic voice, static spat. Wait, the collector snapped. Go back. Back where? But the collector had seized the knob. When he'd finished futzing, he sat up, raised an eyebrow at Nadine. She smiled in surprise. I love this song. Me too, he said. So there. You love songs? There are songs you love? She was laughing, reaching for his hand when he burst out singing. She was gone when I first met her, couldn't even find the floor. Nadine joined in. To her amazement, Spook did too. I helped her out, I brought her down, but when I did, she wasn't there anymore. They were positively harmonizing as that exquisite verse arced toward its conclusion, their voices hitting the rise right it swept off down the... Except the voice on the radio didn't rise. It plunged instead off that so familiar melody, down to a low, droning drawl where it rooted furiously in a furrow of words Nadine had never heard before, gorgeous and wrong and strange, something about mist in the bones, about the heat under midnight. Then, like a rabbit chased from a garden, it skipped the song entirely, and the music grooved out on a broken guitar arpeggio. The collector swiveled the volume almost all the way to silent. You knew that was going to happen, Nadine said, her voice somewhere between amazed and accusatory. I thought it might, said the collector. Actually, I didn't think so. Frankly, I thought that particular search for that particular client was never going to... Spook, where's that signal coming from? Can we locate it? You can if I'm involved, said Spook. Group sing-along immediately discarded in favor of Quest. Because he and the collector were the same species, Nadine realized. And here she was, sitting forward, calling up from her own formidable memory everything she knew about Robert William Guthrie, pulling her ram-crammed netbook from her nightpack. Spook had taken down a cloth-bound reference volume. He started flipping pages, asking, What band? Can you read the number? I need the whole set of digits. But when the collector told him, he glanced up. You sure? The collector actually twitched in his impatience, like a bird dog with the scent in his nostrils. It's local, said Spook. How local? Right there. Spook gestured toward the open water as if pointing to a precise spot. Hang on. He stood, popped a latch on what Nadine had always taken for a bread box, partly because it had the word bread box engraved across the front, and drew down an impressively ridiculous piece of machinery with two mini-dish antennae on top. When he flicked a switch, lights blinked. You are a spook. Spook swiveled another dial. The antennae rotated. Lights flashed. He looked up. 15 miles out, straight toward the Farallones. We need a boat, said the collector, standing. How do we get a boat? Spook glanced around him. The collector and Nadine caught his meaning at the same moment. This thing floats? Nadine said. Then she was grabbing her netbook off the table as the engines rumbled to life. She joined Spook and the collector topside. The houseboat shrugged free of its moorings and slowly, cumbersomely, like a manatee, shuddered out of its berth into the bay. The moment they cleared the harbor's headland, the first wisps of mist rose in their wake. By the time they were 3 miles out, the northern California coast had vanished behind them, and the rumble of the boat's engines had sunk into itself as though swaddled in gauze. The mist wasn't thick, and it wasn't cold exactly, but for Nadine it was familiar. She'd last experienced it more than a decade ago, on nights when it streamed off Galway Bay and all the way inland, causing this exact same painless ache, this dry damp. Even as a child, it had made her feel far from home, long before she'd left. Spook switched on an overhead flood, cut speed, checked their course a lot. Once, he sent the collector below to make sure the signal was still broadcasting. Be alongside him in 20 minutes, maybe less, as long as we don't accidentally run him over. Nadine held up the netbook. Anything I can poke around for? Want to tell me what you heard? Same thing you did, said the collector, returning, staring into the fog as though translating it. Right. But it meant something else to you. Not to me, to our client. Are you really going to make me do this one question at a time again? The collector smiled. Sorry. Habit. I thought we didn't do music people. It's not that we don't do them. We're just never what they need. Either they're hunting rare pressings or stolen tapes, and those aren't hard to track, so it's just a question of what someone's willing to pay, so snore. Or else they're hunting something they've heard stories about, and those almost always turn out to be stories. Apocryphal concerts no one actually saw, but everyone knows occurred. I really thought this was one of those. I mean, it's been years. At least 8, right? The collector actually looked at her then. How'd you know that? Nadine sighed. Because I don't know about it. So, pre-me. Oh, yeah. His grin was neither apology nor even acknowledgement, but there was love in it. Sometimes. Anyway, she prompted, you'd love this guy. Super passionate Robert William Guthrie freak. Nadine wrapped her arms to her chest as the mist wriggled in deeper. Spook just peered straight ahead, looking incredibly captain-like. The waters over the side looked black now, opaque. Probably they were empty. Aren't all Robert William Guthrie freaks super? Yeah, but when this guy talks about Guthrie performing, most people hate Guthrie performing because he never just sings the songs the way people remember. Right. But this guy says people don't understand. He says Guthrie's on this eternal quest because he knows there's a right way and only one for every word in every song on any given night. The way those specific syllables in that particular rhythm in his voice are meant to sound that day. But he says catching all of that at once is like trying to get a butterfly to land on you. Some nights it's there for a single second, and then the first bump against the bottom of the boat did little more than surprise them, knock Nadine sideways half a step and cause her to clutch the netbook. And that was good, because the second bump rocked the ship 15 degrees sideways, dropped the collector to one knee, and caused Spook to hiss in surprise. The hell, he said, stretching to see over the bow. The collector straightened, turned toward Nadine, his expression so clueless, so astonished, as though he'd only just realized he was on a boat, that she relaxed. A bit. Was that a log? She asked. Shark? Spook watched the water. Every few seconds, it bumped them. Never too hard. Eventually he shrugged. Just some chop. Which didn't sound that unusual to Nadine. And so while she noted Spook's hint of uncertainty, she made herself ignore it. Should be there in 5, Spook said into the mist. Maybe less. Less. The boat heaved again. Not too hard. So our man, Nadine prodded the collector, Robert William Guthrie guy. Oh, said the collector. I'm not a musico, as you know, but this guy made me understand. He talked about this legendary version, the one we just heard, I'm pretty sure, that Guthrie did of that song once on some broadcast and then discarded, and it's never been heard since by anyone. He says that when Guthrie gets it right, you can hear the magic, and when you sit with our client and he explains, you really can hear. You can't, though, Nadine said, and the boat bumped, and Spook swore. The collector wasn't surprised at her interruption, or annoyed. He just waited, because he was much more interested in what she might say than whether they might drown, which was really why they were a team as well as a couple. Nadine went on. Not really. I know those guys. They're all over Ireland. They explain it to you. They point out the moment. They get so excited you think you really do hear something. But I think they just make you want to, because they do so badly. Because the magic in music, it's not just the singer, or any one way of singing on one night for everyone. It can't be. It's too simple. Maybe there, said Spook. And right as he said it, the boat, as though juddering down a launch into a glassy pond, leveled, and the bumping stopped. Moments ago, Nadine realized, without being told and on instinct, Spook had cut the motors. They glided now toward the little sailboat, just taking shape in the mist. It seemed tiny drifting there, its deck empty, sails slumping in the absence of wind, like some kid's toy sucked out to sea. As the mist closed behind them, blotting out the rest of the world, Nadine felt a shudder slide up her back. Abruptly, she turned. The water through which they'd come swelled and flattened, slapping over itself as it churned. She gestured toward the sailboat. Isn't that awfully small to be out here? Spook was watching the water too, the glassiness beneath them, the royal everywhere else. No, he said slowly, but I see what you mean. It's like a hurricane, said Nadine, like we've reached the eye. A hurricane in the water? Can that happen? Shh, the collector said. Their houseboat drifted closer, and then they heard it. Somehow, because of the mist, the ocean, what reached Nadine's ears sounded remarkably like the signals that streamed from Spook's shortwave. Same tinny compression, same sense of traveling thousands of miles on a rush of air, even though the sound came from right in front of them. Hands on the bow, head tilted forward, Nadine felt the music lap against her, flow inside. Her spine tingled. Muddy waters, she murmured. Wow. Really early. This has got to be one of the first times with the amp when everyone... She looked up at the collector. Unless this is the first time. But that recording's supposedly... Okay, who is this guy? Hello, the ship, Spook called, and Nadine froze, half expecting pirates to boil out of the hold. Then she turned on Spook. Hello, the ship? People really say that? Spook's smile could be so shy sometimes. Somebody says it. But nobody answered. The houseboat reached the little sailboat. With one more look toward Nadine, for approval, she realized, because like the collector, he thought of her as captain somehow. He took rope from some desktop receptacle, tossed it over the sailboat's rail, and in a few efficient passes of his hands, knotted the crafts together. Permission to come aboard, the collector yelled, and Nadine started to laugh, and the music went silent. But just for a second, and only because a song had ended. Immediately another started, some 1930s crooning thing, violins warbling, voice floating up from the crackled drift on the mist. The music set all three of them swaying. If they stayed here much longer, Nadine thought, the collector might even ask her to dance. Instead, he said, "Permission granted?" "Normal," Nadine warned. The collector ignored her. "I'd almost say we were invited." And he stepped onto the sailboat, just as the crooning song melted into its own wavering, to be followed instantly by some banjo hurtling off at breakneck speed. "Maybe it's automated," Spook said. "Maybe we should find out before your man there decides he can hornpipe," said Nadine. The collector had swung himself over some coiled rope, moving toward a small set of steps leading down. He was tapping his hands to the beat of the banjo, or the thrum of the search. Carefully, Nadine swung her own legs over the houseboat rail onto the sailboat. Spook followed, and Nadine experienced a momentary, powerful misgiving. She almost asked him to go back, just in case this was something piratey, or stranger than it already seemed. But in a different way than the collector, Spook was in his element, hunched, scuttling forward, making no sound on the nearly bare deck, playing Spook, being his dad. Neither scuttling nor hunching, but keeping her feet quiet, Nadine joined her companions at the stairwell's mouth. Whatever was down there, it was candlelit, the light warm and orange, twitching some, wavering like the voice of the crooner, melting constantly into itself. "Down?" the collector whispered, as if he weren't already on the first step. The voice from below boomed in the near silence, as though they'd hit a depth charge. "Come that far. Seems ridiculous to stop now." "Right, great evening, thanks for having us," Nadine thought, but didn't bother opening her mouth. The collector had already skipped off down the stairs, pulling her with him, unless that was her own curiosity. At a paint-spattered, grooved wooden table, behind a disappointingly Best Buy-looking set of broadcasting equipment, and a cassette deck, and a laptop, and a not-so-Best Buy reel-to-reel, sat a gray-haired black man in a white t-shirt, with a Jolly Roger on it. "We did call out," the collector said. "Didn't you hear us?" The man shrugged. "Knew you weren't the Coast Guard. Probably weren't a shark. Didn't see much point breaking my flow." He had thin shoulders and even thinner arms strung with veins that stretched like strings down guitar necks to surprisingly muscular wrists, and huge hands that flicked over knobs and keys, queued up a track, set it playing. Grimy, grinding 50s blues. "They call me the collector," said the collector, and stuck out his hand, which struck Nadine as a bad idea. But the man at the table just looked up. "Do they? Always happy to meet a brother. And you?" "Me? I'm the pirate radio DJ of your dreams, if you have proper dreams, and they have music in them." All around the cabin, Nadine realized, up the walls, in spaces where storage cabinets and life vest hangers should have been, were narrow wooden shelves crammed with cassettes in clear cases, their sides labeled with strips of red tape that caught the flickery light, glowed faintly, black numbers stenciled into them. LA 82235, BD 112460. Abruptly, Nadine glanced at Spook, who'd seen them all right, was leaning closer, looking for patterns he recognized. Yet again that sensation wisped through her, as though she herself were mist and the air was moving through her, reshaping her. Not pleasant. Reaching behind him, Radio Man selected a case, popped out the cassette, and slid it into the deck. Spook, target acquired, sneaking about, apparently finished for the evening, took up post against the doorframe. He looked bored. Behind him, light seemed to flit in the cassette cases. The collector plunked himself on the table's edge, gaze flashing up the walls, over the equipment, into the radio man's eyes, which had leveled on the collector's, had not, as far as Nadine had seen, left his face. From speakers mounted into the wall, thick, echoing Fender Rhodes chords sounded, the chords brooding, strange, neither minor nor major, the rhythm steady and slow, relentless as hammer on railroad ties. And then that voice, wavery as the candlelight, cartoon deep, swooning. Dracula minus fangs and even hypnotic power, lovelorn and hopeless, and so much sexier for it, at least if you were an Irish lass, attacked from all sides by pub versions of the Wild Rover, out for a drive through the burn with the boy from NUI Galway with green flecks in his eyes. Holy shit, Blaine Fury, she murmured, then stopped, leaned into the table, listening closely. Not a song she knew? There were no Blaine Fury songs she didn't know. And that whistling in the background, not human whistling, wind with snow, and no band at all? Her mouth opened, to breathe, not to speak, and then she spoke, too. Blaine Fury in Montreux. Radio Man's eyes left the collector's face, moved to Nadine's. Very good. Not home base for most of my listeners. 1977, she said. December, January? Her eyes leapt to the red label on the open cassette case, which made total sense now. BF 122677. She did note in some corner of her astonished brain that the case no longer glowed, but didn't process that then. My God, December 26th? What is that? The week Mick stole his wife? The day? Jesus, I read about this session. Him in that castle with that guitar player he wouldn't even let in the studio, just playing and playing, songs he'd have finished, other people's songs, but I read he didn't even record it, not one note. Yes, said Radio Man, that's what you've read. For the first time he smiled. Strange smile, no glee in it, not the smile of a collecting man with a boat full of treasures thousands of people might have wept, paid, bled to get their hands on. Those specific syllables, she thought, that particular rhythm on any given day, like chasing a butterfly. She stared around the rows of cases, their glow so faint, like tea lights. Something nagged inside her. So you collect perfect moments? There really is such a thing? Even before Radio Man spoke, the collector started knocking his knuckles on the table, not in rhythm with the music, but rapping them down, which drew Nadine's eyes to his face. His eyes narrowed, focused over her shoulder toward the stairwell, or maybe nowhere at all, lips compressed, head half tilted in a shake, because she'd missed something. Radio Man folded his veiny arms across his chest. Even sitting, he looked tall as a telephone pole. And as dangerous to touch? No, he said. I collect, awakenings. That's a word for it. First moments, said the collector, and rapped his knuckles on the table hard enough that even Spook glanced over. And then Nadine knew what was bothering her. That tea light glow everywhere, but no tea lights, or candles either. Her eyes flicked back to the open Blaine Fury cassette case, which wasn't glowing, which meant the glow, that low red light. Radio Man's attention had snapped back to the collector, and now his voice swelled, not so much in volume, but with a force that could have been joy. It approximated joy, Nadine thought, hand rising to her heart, which was doing its own rapping against her ribs. Also, she seemed to be fighting back tears. For each of them, yes, the moment they, he grunted, unless that was a giggle, discover what they have in them. More tabletop rapping, hard, pointless, not like the collector at all. With a sigh, he stopped, looked away from Spook and back to Radio Man. What you gave them, he said. For Nadine, 3 things happened at the same time. Her mind went wild, thinking hurricanes in water, moments like butterflies, gorgeous voices in perfect mist, the glow in this room. Also, she started shivering under her shoulders and couldn't get that to stop. And finally, she realized why the collector was knocking, and why that hadn't worked. Well now, said Radio Man, leaving only the question of what they offer in trade. Radio Man laid his huge palms on the table, fanned out his fingers like a poker player who'd been called. And then he really did smile. Wow, said the collector, because at that moment he was genuinely amazed, head over heels for the 1000th time at the moment of discovery, which always left him vulnerable. Normal. Nadine moved closer, trying to get his attention, which was hopeless just then. So, there really is a crossroads? Is that what they do? Meet you at the crossroads? Go down on their knees? We can do crossroads, Radio Man said. I can come to your living room, your castle in Montreux. He glanced at Nadine, halting her advance toward the table, and winked. Hell, we can meet at 7-Eleven if that's most convenient. Carefully, Nadine edged forward, legs unsteady, heart thudding. Her eyes leapt back to the tapes, the red glow radiating faintly from every single one of them, from the tape itself, from whatever this man had taken from all these people and threaded onto the spools. She studied the initials and dates to realize she could guess them all, because every person collected on these walls had become someone collected on walls. Every single one. And in return, you get souls? The collector asked. Radio Man snorted. I don't exactly get anything. I accept what they offer. I remove what they no longer need or can't have. Nadine reached the collector's side. Casually, so casually, she let her arms dangle down the back of his chair. Unlike the collector's, her taps barely qualified as sound. She just needed him to register that they were there, understand what he'd done wrong, so he could finish whatever the hell he'd started and get them out of here, preferably with as little as possible removed. So, their souls, like I said. The collector remained focused entirely on his conversation, paying no attention to Nadine whatsoever. Radio Man rested his chin in his hands. I don't think they'd say that. I think they'd say their souls are right there. He gestured at his speakers, the music streaming from them. Partly to cover any noise she might make, but also because a profound disappointment had welled up inside her, Nadine said, That can't be it. For the second time, Radio Man lifted his eyes to her. Nadine had to keep from shrinking back. The guide barely moved, and yet the movement had surprised her. At least he was watching her now, not her hands, not the collector's face as he realized what she was doing. She felt that happen in his spine as her eyes welled. Beautiful Blaine Fury, so alone, the Heathcliff of her stupid teenage dreams. What can't, child? The child neither patronizing nor nasty. Music. She made herself speak louder because the collector had lifted his own hands back to the table, started tapping. Still not in rhythm with the radio, but in his own rhythm now. Dot, dot, dash, dot, dash. Even as she continued speaking, Nadine felt Spook look up, comprehending at last that the collector was telling him something. Inspiration. Every great note anyone's ever played. It can't just come from you. I don't believe it. Cocking hands behind his head, Radio Man laughed. Good, because I never said it. Who said all? I'm just talking about these. He gestured around him. Dash, dot, dot, dot. The ones who want it so badly, it's like teeth in their hearts. Bites them every time they breathe. The ones who want it like that and don't quite have it. Or they have too much something else. There it was again, that smile. And this time Nadine realized what it was other than pride that made it so unsettling, so wrong. It had kindness in it, where no kindness should or seem to be. Those are my charges, said Radio Man. Children, almost. Then, abruptly, he glanced down at the collector, because he'd realized, just as Nadine had, that the knocking had stopped. And because he was looking at the collector, he somehow missed what she glimpsed out of the corner of her eye, the lightning snatch of Spook's fingers, the single cassette disappearing into his coat. Their souls, you mean, said the collector, fast, to distract. Radio Man half rose like a panther coming out of his crouch. Nadine grabbed the collector's arm to pull him away, but the man just stared. That word again. You have a better one? We should go now. Nadine tugged at the collector's sleeve, nodded over her shoulder to Spook. Want to get our boat ready? Sure, said Spook. See ya. He scampered up onto the sailboat's deck. Radio Man just let him go. Seemed to be thinking still. It's not that at all. It's more... He waved a hand. Like an extra antenna. Or not extra. The ones we're mostly born with that allows us to pick up signals, yeah. He was nodding, grinning. To hear people around us. Immerse in lives not our own. A valuable bit of ourselves, I admit, but if what you want, in your very core... He stopped grinning then, pinned the collector half standing to his spot, and Nadine to hers. in your soul. If what you want is to pull down other voices, magic, out of the air, and then broadcast that out of yourself, well, that extra antenna can get in the way, don't you think? Fill your ears with ordinary, aggravating, everyday voices. Connect you to each bland, boring, passing moment. Then suddenly the collector was up. On the radio, the fender chords hammered away to nothingness, leaving the whistle of the Montreux winter wind. And Radio Man glanced down, sat back in his chair to cue up another miraculous track. Nadine shot up the stairs, felt the collector behind her, waited for trailing footsteps. Heard none. Hurry, she hissed, and was relieved and amazed when the collector surged past her. He leapt across the gap onto the houseboat as Spook worked furiously at the knot he'd made, swung the ropes free. The collector offered Nadine his hand, and she swatted it away as she jumped and landed, skidding beside him. You stole from that guy? You don't steal from anyone, and you think that guy's an easy first mark? I didn't steal. Spook did. Nadine punched his arm as the houseboat shuddered back to life, the engines loud in the preternatural stillness, the motionless water that even their motor didn't seem to stir. That's what you were telling him to do? Are you crazy? Are you both crazy? Did you get it? The collector barked, half dancing in his excitement. Spook, you have it? Right here, he said. Morse code. Genius. I thought so, said the collector, flashed a momentary grin at Nadine, and snatched the case out of Spook's hands. Nadine shivered yet again. What is Robert William Guthrie Guy paying you, anyway? It's not for him. The collector clicked open the case. I wouldn't have done it for him. Then the tape was in his hands. The glow so faint, but there. The little throb occasional, and even fainter. The collector cupped his palm, holding the cassette as though it were a bird chick. Only after a long moment of staring at that did Nadine look at the collector's face and realize he was weeping. Normal, what the hell is... He was one of the first who ever came to me, and I laughed at him. He said he was looking for... that he'd lost a piece of himself to a collector, that if I ever saw it I would know, and could I please bring it back. I don't even know where he is or if he's still alive, but if I can bring him this... Wouldn't, if I were you, said Radio Man, and Nadine whirled, thinking he was right behind her. But he was on his own ship, fully 10 feet away already, giant hands folded behind him, like wings. Spook gunned the engine, but the collector said, Stop. Stop, Nadine snapped. The collector stepped to the houseboat rail, and Nadine noticed the mist rilling down the air like raindrops on a window pane, so that Radio Man and his ship began to blur, waver. Why not? Asked the collector. Why shouldn't I return this to the man you took it from? Just what do you think will happen when you do? When you return all those awful, beautiful, ravenous yearnings the rest of us feel when we're young, but without the lived-in years to temper them. That's a lot of hope and hunger you're holding, friend. What you're not holding is the extra time or wisdom or experiences that would satisfy or lessen them, help you learn to live with them or let them go the way the rest of us do. You sure you want to give that back? And there it was again, that smile, that terrible kindness. Is that the kind of gift you give a friend? Do you think, in the end, he'll say he preferred your gift to mine? The first slap of open water banged into the hull, knocked them sidelong, tilted them forward. And when the collector and Nadine had righted themselves and looked up, there was only mist. Maybe the sailboat was still in it, but the music had gone. Nadine watched the collector slide the cassette into its case, close it, drop the case into his pocket. He didn't speak. At the wheel, Spook turned toward shore. The water seemed to give way around them, rocking them gently as they moved. Plain old sleepy nighttime ocean. Seagulls above it. Monsters well down in it. What are you going to do? Nadine said, moved to touch her companion's arm. The collector let her, even squeezed back once. Then he said, I think I'll go down and listen to the radio. That's where she found him once they'd moored at Spook's berth, sitting by the shortwave, still tuned to the band where Radio Man's station had been, listening to blankness, the spits of static on the empty air. Thanks very much.